Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons and video games and paths not chosen. All right, so yesterday yesterday was Sunday, and we had, right after church, we had another family who was relatively new to our church over for a nice lunch right after church, right? And so we had lunch with this family, and then we just spent the afternoon talking with this family. And all of this came about because my wife saw a new family in church, relatively new. They're coming in, they want to engage in the church, but they're new, right? So they might not know that many people, right? And so she just wanted to, display some hospitality, welcome this family in, right? So what was interesting was we get the families together, and it was a wonderful afternoon. We were really blessed with having this family's company. Just had a really nice lunch, enjoyed one another's time, had lots of fellowship and talking. It was really nice, right? But one of the things that happened was the husband of this. So this family's just like our family, only a little smaller. So I'm a husband. I've been married coming up on 27 years, and I have a wife, and I have 4 children. This family is exactly like ours, but 2 children, right? So and the other thing is, like, when I was looking at this family and also looking at this other gentleman, this other husband and father, also another Christian, just to be clear, it was like looking in a mirror, right? Because the reality is, I do think, it makes sense that this family would be very similar to ours. Often in social or political or even cultural structures, there is a sorting that happens, right? I think as cultures we try to avoid this, but it does happen at times. And so I was looking at this other gentleman, and it was like looking in a mirror, right? Well, there was one critical difference between the two of us. Virtually everything was the same. We're both Christians, both husbands, both fathers, right? Both of us have played Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm going to get to that difference in a minute. Both of us have played video games in the past, so there's really only and then what else is the same? So there was all these things that were identical, right? This gentleman was 1 year younger than me. Both work in IT, right? Both are huge Star Wars fans. There was very, very little difference between the two of us, right? But there was one key difference, which was really fascinating to me, because it felt like I was able to look into a path I had not taken, right? Because generally, the paths of our lives were virtually identical, right? And so I was like, wow, and so looking at this other gentleman, it was like I was looking at a path I had not taken. So what was the key difference between our lives? Well, the key difference was video games, right? So when I was coming up when I was young, I played video games and I played Dungeons and Dragons. This gentleman was exactly the same, right? When I was about 24 years old, I was playing a lot of Tony Hawk Pro Skater, right? It was very early on, and it was one of Tony Hawk's early video games, right? And I was playing a few other video games. I was playing pretty heavily, right? And I really made a conscious decision. I was like, I'm not really getting a good return on investment for the time I spend on these video games. I don't really think I get I'm not getting value from the time I'm spending on these video games. But I did not feel the same about Dungeons and Dragons. I felt like when I played Dungeons and Dragons, I got new friends, I got higher vocabulary, I was reading, I was doing math, I was stretching, I was creating worlds, I was writing, all these things. So Dungeons and Dragons was encouraging more, stronger social skills to build and maintain friendships. Was, giving me stronger vocabulary to read and then write the worlds that I was building. Also, the core structure was not staring at another screen. It was actually reading, a book, right? And so I really, really felt like it was a better return on investment. Well, this gentleman also played Dungeons and Dragons, did not make that change. And so I backed out of video games and said, video games is no longer my hobby. Video games is an interest that I have, that I will do everything I can to avoid spending more time on, because in my opinion, the return on investment is low, right? So yesterday was like looking at someone who had made a different choice and gone down a different path. And it gave me an opportunity to see, did I make a mistake? Should I have stayed on that side, right? Because I feel very strongly that I made the right choice, right? But here was practical evidence of what would have happened if I had stayed on that other path. Well, what I found out was very interesting to me. So one, this gentleman's hobby is video games. He's continued. He never stopped. And he's been playing video games for probably close to 30 years, right? Maybe 35, 40 years. Exactly the same length of time that I've been heavily playing tabletop role-playing games, and specifically Dungeons & Dragons, right? So one of the things that were the same from that is one thing is his family has absolutely no interest in his video game hobby. My family has absolutely no interest in my Dungeons & Dragons hobby, right? So my spouse and my children really, they've all been exposed to the hobby. It's just not their thing. Same thing on the other side for this other gentleman, right? The video gaming gentleman. His family really doesn't, they don't give 2d20s for his hobby. My family doesn't give 2d20s for my hobby. So as far as the engagement of family, neither hobby did anything to engage our families anymore in our own interests, right? Which I thought that was very interesting, right? The other thing that was interesting was World of Warcraft. So I saw World of Warcraft come up when it did back in like 2004, right? And maybe a little earlier than that. And I was really fascinated to see what happened with World of Warcraft. And because I had quit video games probably 8 to 10 years before that, I was able to view World of Warcraft from afar. I was able to look at it sideways, right? I wasn't involved in it, right? But if you were a video gamer, World of Warcraft was a vortex that sucked every video gamer down into it. And what happened was many video gamers would just swim out from the edge and say, oh my gosh, I see that I'm sucked into a vortex, and I'm just going to swim off right now before I get sucked down and the current is too strong. Well, sure enough, this gentleman was kind enough to share with me that that World of Warcraft was a vortex that virtually destroyed him, right? That came close to destroying him, right? He said that while he's been able to play a whole bunch of video games, with still being a loving husband and father and doing everything good, World of Warcraft was different, and that he had 60, 80 level characters, many of them alts, 6-hour guild runs for months, even a couple of years, and that he had to reach a point where he was, losing sleep and threatening everything he cared about, in order to and he saw it. He got sucked down pretty deep into that vortex and had to pull himself out, and said, he had to put the game aside because it was so essentially deleterious to everything he cared about. It did not improve his life in any way, and he had to tear himself out of that. And then he went to games that he was able to deal with and manage more carefully, right? And I thought that was really, really fascinating, because from the outside looking in, World of Warcraft looked like an incredibly dangerous game to me. And he said he used the term addictive, right? And one of the things is, I have always loved Dungeons & Dragons, but it has never been something where, because it's so much more difficult, and you cannot just stay in one place, and you need other people, and it has to be maintained, and there are all these boundaries to playing the game, right? That the game itself structures itself where it is far less addictive than you would find with any MMORPG, right? So I thought that was really interesting, where because I had walked away from Dungeons & Dragons, it did save me from having to deal with an incredibly addictive game like World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft might have done that for me, but it might have been Diablo, or it might have been something else. And so generally, I don't think that tabletop role-playing games are structured in a way where it is as easy to get down that obsessive hole, that hole where you've been playing obsessively, where you are kind of pushing off wives and husbands, and where you're pushing off the people you care about, right? Where you have to look yourself in the eye and say, this is too much, right? Now, I will say this, with Dungeons & Dragons, there were times where I said, okay, I need to manage my purchases, right? And so Dungeons & Dragons definitely has aspects that will drive you to jump into it too much, right? But overall, I think the actual structure of it is much more carefully constructed and much less dangerous overall than an MMORPG or any of these video games, because all you need to do to remain in those video game worlds is just remain in your seat, right? And have that electrical connection, right? And so it's just, I feel like it's much easier. So, whereas with tabletop role-playing games, they have elements that make them easier to keep in a better balance, right? And I think, having talked with this gentleman, that was always my opinion, but I think, seeing this person who has gone down virtually every path that I have, and hit this struggle, and looks back at World of Warcraft like something they carefully escaped. It gave me evidence. I really feel that, staying on the Dungeons & Dragons side, just talking to this gentleman, I really feel it's practical evidence that I was right. I chose the right path, right? And so I thought that was really interesting. And the other thing that I thought really even made this even further was, this gentleman had, about 3 or 4 years ago, tried Dungeons & Dragons Encounters to get back into Dungeons & Dragons, right? And the reason why was he was missing the Dungeons & Dragons action that he had when he was young, when he was playing in his teen years. The reason he went back to Dungeons & Dragons Encounters is he had very little time, and Dungeons & Dragons Encounters, just playing in a shop in organized play, was offering 2-hour games, right? He tried 5 or 6 sessions, and what he found was that when he was getting there, the group was wasting 45 minutes to an hour at the start, and then would have fights about the rules for half an hour to 45 minutes. So easily, an hour and 15 minutes to as much as an hour and 45 minutes per game was being wasted on talk at the beginning, right? Which there should be 10, 15 minutes of that, but 45 minutes of that, or even an hour, right? And then fights over the rules. We're actually taking we're taking 75 to 100% of the amount of time that it should have run the game, and the games were running 3.5, 4 hours long, right? Which was just, and he said he didn't like it, so he was unable to get back into the game, right? But it also told me the fact that he had attempted to go back because the video games were not giving him the type of play adventure that he had longed for. I thought that was really fascinating, especially from the perspective that I had never really, there was never a time where I was like, oh, I really wish I kept playing, StarCraft or World of Warcraft or Diablo. I regret that decision to break away from that format, right? Whereas this gentleman did regret that and went and tried to restore that gaming experience. So it was really looking like it was like looking in a mirror for me, and it was really fascinating. So very, very interesting day for me, a surprising day for me. Did not expect to encounter my doppelganger, who had taken a different life path, but it was really fascinating to see what that looked like. Take care.